He sat in the trench, soaked through, mud crusted on his boots, blood dried into the cuff of his sleeve, not his. Overhead, shells. Around him, screams, coughing, groaning, the churn of dirt splitting open again and again. The earth felt like it was trying to vomit the war back out. His hands, steady. His breath, tight, mechanical. His eyes, somewhere else, somewhere far beyond this. In his lap wasn't a rifle, wasn't a Bible like the others clung to. It was a notebook, crumpled, damp, covered in fingerprints of mud and ash, pages filled with small, square, almost inhuman handwriting. Precise, controlled, like someone trying to trap chaos in grammar. This is where he chose to write philosophy. Ludwig Wittgenstein, richer than kings, son of Austria's steel empire. He could have inherited factories, funded operas, built anything he wanted, but he left it all. Walked off the map. Why? Because words were broken, and nobody seemed to notice. He wasn't trying to write something beautiful. He was trying to write something survivable, not for publication, not for legacy, for himself. He believed that if he couldn't think cleanly, precisely, without bullshit, he didn't deserve to live. So he carried a pistol, not for the enemy, for himself, not as a soldier, as a philosopher. He made a deal with himself, finish the book, or use the gun. That was the tension behind every sentence. That's the stake. The book had to be perfect, or there was no point. Back home in Vienna, people argued about aesthetics over champagne. In Cambridge, professors traded theories on ethics like cigars. But Ludwig, he volunteered for the Eastern Front. Not out of duty, not patriotism. He didn't care who won. He came to war to test an idea. If you can build something real in hell, then it's real. If it breaks, then it was never truth to begin with. He wrote between shellings, between amputations, between dragging the dead. He wasn't writing feelings. He was writing a structure, a ladder made of language, a map to clarity, sentence by sentence. His core belief was brutal. Most of what we say is noise. Not because it's wrong, because it doesn't mean anything. The world is precise. Language isn't. But maybe it could be, if stripped, tightened, rebuilt, like a machine, where every part has a function, and anything without function, deleted. He wanted a language where lying became impossible, where vagueness couldn't hide, where if a sentence didn't carry truth, it simply wouldn't exist. And everything else. You shut the fuck up. He wasn't writing for you, not for the future. He was writing to survive the fire in his head, a fire that burned hotter than the war around him. If he didn't put it down, sentence by sentence, it would consume him. It was never about being read. It was about not dying a liar. He didn't want fame, didn't want disciples, didn't want respect. He wanted to cut a path through the bullshit, with logic as the blade. And when the path was clear, disappear into silence. One line, written like a final verdict. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. Most people quote that like it's poetry. He meant it like a threat. Wittgenstein wasn't a philosopher in a robe. He was a demolitionist, a man with a pencil and a loaded pistol, sitting in a hole in the earth, trying to write the last sentence anyone ever needed. And the thing he wanted to destroy wasn't war. It was language. Because if you tear down the words we use to survive, what's left? Maybe nothing. Maybe that was the point. Turn-of-the-century Vienna looked like a civilization in peak bloom. Art Nouveau curled around every window frame. There were orchestras in every square, paintings that bled gold, and minds that thought they were on the edge of decoding the universe. Men in well-cut coats discussed logic over black coffee and lit cigarettes from silver cases. Everything sounded important. Everyone sounded like they knew something. The consensus was clear. Language just needed fine-tuning, sharper grammar, smarter syntax, and then truth would show up, polite well-groomed, and sit at the table like an expected guest. There was a fever in the air, but it wore a monocle. Freud was cutting the psyche open on a couch. Klimt was making saints blush. Mahler was rewriting God through melody. Schoenberg, meanwhile, was turning harmony into math. The whole city was on a sugar high of ideas, high on symbols, buzzing with theory. And right in the middle of it walked a man who couldn't breathe. Ludwig. Wittgenstein moved through this world like a ghost in broad daylight. He didn't flirt, didn't laugh, didn't talk, unless forced. He watched, and the more he watched, the more nauseous he became. He sat in cafes and listened. Two men to his left, discussing the nature of ethics. One of them said, "Well, really, morality is a kind of aesthetic." The other nodded, smug, sipping absinthe. Laughter followed. Agreement. Mutual validation. Wittgenstein blinked once, then said flatly, loud enough for both to hear, "None of this makes any fucking sense." They froze, smiled awkwardly, shifted the topic. He didn't care. He wasn't trying to provoke. He genuinely couldn't stand the noise. Because to him what they were doing wasn't thinking. It was role play. Words like beauty, freedom, truth got passed around like expensive props. People repeated them with confidence, with style, with charm. But underneath? Emptiness. He watched people say things they didn't mean, and mean things they couldn't say. He watched conversations like slow-motion car crashes, elegant phrasing, precise grammar, polished tone, and underneath, nothing but fog. And the worst part was, they believed themselves. That was the sickness. One night, in his apartment, he stared at a single sentence in a logic book. "All sparrows are birds." Seems harmless, but he tried to break it down, formally, and it collapsed. What counts as a sparrow? What counts as is? What if bird isn't a defined set, but a fluid category? What if we're all just naming things like children in a sandbox? He tried to write it out logically. Symbols, brackets, premises, and it broke. He realized, even the simplest sentence wasn't simple. It just pretended to be. That moment didn't feel like a revelation. It felt like the ground cracked under his feet. Because if we couldn't speak truth in the simplest case, then what the hell was the rest of philosophy doing? He wasn't skeptical. He wasn't curious. He was disgusted. Language wasn't reflecting reality. It was building a fake one made of echo chambers and costume words, a reality where everyone acted like they understood, and nobody dared admit that they didn't. The more precise the grammar, the better the lie. To others, language was a bridge. To him it was a cage, elegant, useful, and locked from the inside. He didn't rant about it in public. He didn't write angry essays. He just watched, and inside it festered. If this is understanding, he thought, then maybe understanding is a fucking myth. He read the great philosophers, and saw corpses in velvet. He read books and saw page after page of professional miscommunication, sentences built to impress, not to mean. The world kept saying it needed new answers. He knew it needed fewer questions, less talk, more silence, not because silence was romantic, because silence doesn't lie. Everyone loved the sound of their own intellect. He wanted to cut the sound out, rip it from the root. But here's the nightmare. He was caught in the same trap. He needed language to say language was broken. He needed grammar to dissect grammar. He couldn't run. He couldn't break the loop. Only one option left. Go inside the structure. Pretend to play the game. Step into the system. And then, set the timer. Plant the charge. Blow the whole thing up. From within. He walked away from money like it was noise. Not because he hated wealth, but because he hated what it did to thought. Every coin, every inheritance letter, every polished conversation about investments. Static. Comfort was a filter that dulled precision. Clarity required friction, so he gave it all away. Millions. Quietly. No ceremony. No letter to the press. Just handed it to his siblings like scraps and disappeared. No goodbye. No forwarding address. One day he was there. The next gone. He ended up on the edge of a fjord in Norway. A cabin. No electricity. No books. No heat. Just notebooks, snow, and silence that wrapped around the skull like a vice. This wasn't retreat. It was prep. He was going to war, and this was the training ground. He spent the days walking in the snow, talking to himself in logic. At night, hunched over a rough desk, he scratched out statements in his notebook like a mad mechanic rebuilding a broken engine. He was building a machine, not of steel, but of meaning. A structure where every sentence had one job. No metaphors, no softness, no fat. A sentence should do something or be erased. There was no room for the kind of language people wrote books about and never understood. He wanted language that worked like math. Clean, brutal, unforgiving. One false symbol, and the entire system would collapse. That was the point. But the more he tried to sterilize his mind, the more the noise leaked in. Doubt. Guilt. The kind of fog logic can't burn through. He wasn't just building a system. He was trying to purge himself. Strip the human out. He wasn't strong enough. Still too full of memory, desire, weakness. So, he escalated. He signed up for war. Volunteered. Not for nation. Not for politics. For cleansing. If peace couldn't silence the noise, maybe the front could. He was sent to the Eastern Front. Trenches, rot, screams, limbs in mud, real chaos. Not intellectual, not abstract. Meat, blood, finality. Wittgenstein didn't flinch. He carried a gun and a notebook. While men prayed and sobbed, he wrote. While soldiers died next to him, he diagrammed propositions. One day soldiers were dragging a man with half a leg, screaming, ribs open, blood steaming in the cold. Wittgenstein stood nearby, holding his notebook, watching, calm. He pulled a pencil from his coat, leaned against the wall of the trench, and wrote, 2.12. The picture is a model of reality. No panic, no commentary, just another gear in the system. To the others, this was hell. To him it was proof. If a sentence could survive this, it was real. While some men found God in war, he found grammar. He kept writing. Tight, stacked, numbered statements. Not essays. Not reflections. Blueprints. Proposition 1. The world is everything that is the case. Proposition 2. What is the case, a fact, is the existence of states of affairs. On and on. Cold. Compressed. Not a single wasted word. He was building a ladder. From confusion to clarity. From language to silence. Because, once you'd said everything that could be said, there'd be nothing left. And that was peace. At the top of the ladder, not glory. Silence, not failure, completion. The final sentence landed like a knife. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. He wasn't trying to be poetic. He meant it literally. If your words can't say something real, then stop. He believed he had done it, created a language where lies couldn't breathe, where vagueness couldn't sneak in, where a sentence stood or fell by its structure, not its style. He sent the manuscript to Bertrand Russell. Russell, the king of logic at the time, wrote back in awe. "This is a work of genius." Wittgenstein replied, "You don't understand a single word I've written." And he meant it, because it wasn't about understanding. It was about survival. This wasn't philosophy. This was engineering for the mind, surgery on thought, a scalpel to everything fuzzy, dishonest, or self-indulgent. Others were still playing with ideas. He was building weapons. Because for Wittgenstein, logic wasn't a theory. It was armor, and he was still bleeding underneath it. But he never admitted that. Not yet. Not out loud. The limits of my language mean the limits of my world. It wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't meant to sound deep. It was a threat, a boundary, a hard, cold perimeter. If you can't say it clearly, then it doesn't exist for you. It might exist for someone else, in another game, with another grammar. But for you, it's a blind spot, a dead pixel on the screen of reality. Wittgenstein didn't believe in opinions, or feelings, or my truth. Not the way most people threw those words around. To him, they were decorations on confusion, emotion without structure, sentences without skeletons. He hated them not because he was cold, but because he saw what they did. They let people pretend they were thinking, while dodging every demand of precision. He once overheard a student say, "I believe love will defeat evil." He wrote that sentence on the blackboard. Then underneath it, step by step, he started taking it apart. Love. What does that mean here? Passion, care, sacrifice, neurochemical impulse? Is it a noun, a state, an action? Defeat. In what sense? Militarily? Logically? Metaphorically? Over time? In a single act? Evil. Which one? A person? A system? A feeling? Who's evil? By the end of the analysis, the sentence was dust. Not because it was false, because it had no grip, no structure, no test, no clarity. It felt meaningful and meant nothing. And that, to him, was the worst kind of sentence. One that wears the mask of truth but can't carry a single fact across the finish line. He called this kind of language on vacation. Terms walking around drunk, sentences looking deep because they said nothing definite. He saw it everywhere, in politics, in pop culture, in philosophy, especially in philosophy. Philosophers were the worst offenders. Pages and pages of thought, and not a single clause that could be broken into logic. He didn't want to add to it. He wanted to end it. He wasn't there to join the conversation. He was there to shut it down. The Tractatus was meant to be the manual, a codebook, a filter, a system for separating sense from noise, a philosophical border patrol. If people followed it, half of philosophy would collapse overnight, not from new answers, from realization that the questions themselves were broken. What is the meaning of life? What is beauty? What is time? He didn't even argue with these. He just looked at them like someone asked, "What color is Thursday?" Sounds deep. Sounds thoughtful. It's fucking nonsense. You're using the wrong tools, asking things in the wrong grammar. He believed that if you didn't understand the structure of your sentence, its parts, its reference, its boundaries, you weren't thinking. You were hallucinating. He didn't see himself as a philosopher. He saw himself as a bomb technician, diffusing language before it exploded in your hand. He wanted to rebuild language from the ground up, sentence by sentence, clause by clause. Only what can be said should be said. Everything else. Shut the fuck up. He wasn't elegant. He wasn't nice. He wasn't trying to be liked. He was trying not to drown in the flood of beautifully meaningless words that people called thinking. He believed that language, broken language, was the poison in the water. The thing that made people think they understood politics when they didn't. The thing that made people believe they were spiritual when they were just saying nonsense with confidence. The thing that made people fight over words that didn't mean the same thing to anyone involved. He thought the world wasn't being destroyed by evil. It was being destroyed by confused grammar. His nightmare wasn't tyranny. It was bullshit with a PhD. He wasn't building a better way to express yourself. He was building a tool set to destroy 90% of what you think is worth saying. And if that sounds harsh, it should. Because every time you tweet some vague epiphany about your emotions, he would have burned it. Not because it's wrong, because it's lazy. Language, to him, wasn't for self-expression. It was for mapping the terrain of reality. And if your sentences can't be placed on that map, they don't belong, not on paper, not in your mouth, not in your mind. He didn't want more meaning. He wanted boundaries, because once you find where meaning ends, you finally see how small your world is. And then, maybe, you'll stop pretending. And finally, start thinking. He came back from the war with a manuscript and nothing else. No medals, no applause, no speech at the train station. Just a notebook, thin, fragile, packed with numbered sentences, and the quiet belief that he had finished something no one else on earth could have. He handed the Tractatus to Bertrand Russell like a blueprint for thought. And then he vanished. Not metaphorically, literally. One day he was in Cambridge, the next gone. No address, no forwarding letters, just a trail of silence and a pair of empty shoes. He gave away his entire inheritance. Millions. No announcement, no press, no drama. Just removed himself from the financial system like someone deleting a corrupted file. He didn't want to own. He didn't want to owe. Money was just another layer of noise. He found a village in the Austrian mountains, the kind of place where time doesn't pass. It loops. He became a school teacher, a man in a wool coat, standing in front of a blackboard, drilling multiplication tables, into kids who had no idea they were being taught by the man who just rewired 2,000 years of Western philosophy. He taught with the intensity of a surgeon and the patience of a ticking bomb. If they didn't understand, he snapped. If they disrespected the structure, he broke. Not always loudly. Sometimes just with a look that could gut a room. And sometimes, literally, he hit them. He hit children. He hated himself for it. He'd go home and collapse in shame. He wrote letters, apologies. Once he beat himself unconscious. Fists, wall, floor. Woke up on the ground with his face swollen and no memory of how long he'd been out. He couldn't live with contradiction. He had built a system that allowed no space for human error, and then tried to live inside it. And it crushed him. Years later, long after he'd left that school, he came back, quietly, no warning. He knocked on the doors of his former students, grown now, some with kids of their own. He looked them in the eye and said, "I was wrong. I hurt you. I'm sorry." One of them cried. Another said, "You scared me more than anyone ever has." He nodded, took it, didn't explain, just left. He lasted a few years in the village before disappearing again. No letter, no goodbye. He just dissolved back into the silence he trusted more than people. And then, years later, he reappeared in Cambridge. But he didn't come back like a returning master. He came back like a shadow, gaunt, withered, face pale, eyes like cracked glass. He looked like a man who'd seen something no one else had, and wished he hadn't. People whispered. Some were excited. Some were afraid. Then came his first lecture. The room filled early, everyone curious, expecting a show, a confrontation, a spark. He walked in, took a chair, sat, didn't say a word. 1 minute passed, then 5, then 15. Students started shifting in their seats. Some coughed. One whispered, "Is this part of it?" He still said nothing. By minute 20, the silence wasn't awkward. It was suffocating. Finally he spoke, calm, quiet. "Everything I wrote in the Tractatus is wrong." He didn't elaborate. He didn't offer a clever twist or philosophical flourish. He just said it, like a man stating a death. Some laughed, thinking it was irony. Others waited for the punchline. There wasn't one. He wasn't joking. He wasn't performing. He was confessing. He didn't mean the book needed edits. He meant the whole foundation, the system, the logic, the structure, couldn't survive contact with real life. That his philosophy, clean, beautiful, airtight, failed the moment he tried to live inside it. He turned his back on it like a priest renouncing the God he once worshipped. Not because it had failed intellectually, but because it had failed to hold when pressed against reality. He tried to live by a language so precise it left no space for being human. And that broke him. So, he let it go. And in doing so, he became something else, something people couldn't categorize anymore. Not a philosopher, not a teacher, not a prophet. Something harder to label, something harder to ignore. He didn't want applause. He didn't want followers. He wanted to be wrong, on purpose, completely, publicly, to make space for whatever came next. And then, without a plan, he started again. This time, not to build something perfect, but to live with what couldn't be fixed. He started again from zero. No podium, no followers, no statements of intent, just a new notebook and a different kind of anger. This time, he wasn't building anything. No system, no structure, no more ladders to transcendence. He had tried that and watched it collapse under its own clarity. He wasn't there to purify language anymore. He was there to gut it. He called it philosophical investigations, but it didn't read like a book. It was a post-mortem, a record of intellectual collapse, a slow, methodical dismantling of everything he used to believe, by his own hand. It was a conversation with himself, fragmented, circular, unstable. One voice asked, another doubted. Then a third laughed bitterly in the background. No heroes, no answers, just demolition. The Tractatus had said language was a structure, tight, mechanical, logical. He had believed that with the kind of faith you don't question unless you want your soul to snap. Now, he called it a game, not a joke. A game. With roles, with rituals, with unspoken rules. We don't speak to reveal truth. We speak to play our part, to be accepted, to sound educated, to maintain the illusion of coherence. You say, I love you, not to express love, but to trigger a specific reaction. You say, I'm fine, not because you're fine, but because you know the game doesn't allow for real answers. Meaning didn't live in words. It lived in use, in context, in the situation. Words weren't sacred. They were just moves. He once pointed to a brick and said, imagine you're a builder. You yell slab, and your coworker hands you a slab. That's not a sentence. That's a move in a game. It works only inside that game. And life is made of thousands of overlapping games. It hit him like a car crash. If language was a game, then philosophy had spent centuries treating games like math. No wonder everyone was talking past each other. They weren't wrong. They weren't right. They were in different games entirely. And nobody knew the rules. He started to see confusion not as an accident, but as the default state of being human. You think you disagree with someone? Most likely, you're not even talking about the same thing. You think you're being clear? You're just good at faking certainty. He realized the project of clarity, his own life's work, was doomed the moment it touched real life. Because life wasn't clean. It didn't care about truth. It cared about survival, connection, face-saving, power. He had spent years building a perfect tool for a world that didn't want precision. And that truth broke him. It wasn't a cinematic breakdown, no screaming, no collapse in the street. It was quiet, private. The feeling of reading your own book and realizing it speaks a language no one will ever use. He started burning drafts, whole stacks, not in protest, in surrender. He didn't want to leave behind another system that people would turn into scripture. He wanted to say just enough, and nothing more. He kept writing. Sharp lines, fragmented thoughts, razor-thin clarity, wrapped in confusion. Not to teach, to stay honest. Meanwhile, his body fell apart. Stomach pain, exhaustion. Some days he could barely get out of bed. He stopped eating, lost weight, looked translucent. Friends called him a ghost. He moved in with a doctor friend who knew he was dying. Wittgenstein refused the hospital. It was too clean, too polite. He wanted to stay in the fog, with his notebook. He knew what was coming. And he wasn't afraid. In a way, he had already died once, the day he realized his own mind couldn't save him. His final days were quiet. No philosophy, no speeches, just him, a pen, and the thick silence he had been chasing all his life. One day he asked for his notebook, hands shaking, still trying to peel away the last layers of noise. A few pages later he stopped, then whispered to his friend, "Tell them I've had a wonderful life." Flat, simple, no irony, just a man who'd burned everything fake and found something left. A student, visiting near the end, leaned in. "Did you figure it out?" Wittgenstein smiled, that small, sharp smile he gave when he wasn't sure if he was about to cry or laugh. "No," he said, "but I learned how to be silent, the right way." Then he closed his eyes. No light beam, no final thought, just silence. And that was the real answer all along. He didn't build a school. He didn't write manifestos. He didn't train a legion of Wittgensteinians to carry the gospel. Most of his students left confused, some in awe, some in silence, a few in tears. He didn't want followers. He didn't want parrots repeating his name like a slogan. He didn't want a legacy you could quote. He wanted to detonate the need for legacies entirely. But somehow, he became a ghost in the machine. You live in a world shaped by his wreckage, not in statues, not in museums, in code. Every time you say, "Alexa, what's the weather?" Every time you get, "I'm sorry, I didn't understand that," from a chatbot. Every time your GPS auto-corrects your language into commands, the system can compute. That's him. That's Wittgenstein. The way we design interfaces, clear input, clean output, everything else discarded, that's Tractatus in UI form. The entire idea of a valid query. The notion that if a question doesn't have a computable result, it's not meaningful. That's not computer science. That's his war, turned into protocol. When your phone says error, that's a ghost of Wittgenstein saying, "If you can't define what you mean, you're not speaking, you're vibrating." He's not in the app. He's in the filter behind the app. Every modern AI assistant, every semantic search engine, every attempt to make language into something a machine can parse. They all run on bones he helped excavate. He didn't give us content. He gave us boundaries. He didn't show us how to think. He showed us where thought ends. He gave you a tool you don't even know you're using. A silent check running in the background of your head. Do I actually know what I'm saying? And if not, why am I saying it? That was his real legacy. Not ideas. Discomfort. He made smart people afraid of their own sentences. He made academics stop mid-lecture and question whether they were still inside a valid game. He made silence philosophically superior to speaking. He didn't solve big questions. He showed most of them were misfired blanks. He didn't hand out answers. He ripped out the floorboards under the questions and said, "Look, there's nothing here." He stripped down meaning the way a bomb tech strips down a device, wire by wire, label by label, until all that was left was empty space and a deeper kind of awareness. Not peace, alertness. Because inside that space, people found a new kind of freedom, the freedom to say less, the freedom to shut up, the freedom to think without the theater. He didn't leave behind a philosophy. He left a mirror. And once you've looked into it, really looked, something changes. You hear yourself talk, and the words sound off. You start deleting your own tweets before you send them. You hesitate before answering, because now you're wondering, do I actually mean this? Or do I just know how to say it well? And if the answer is the second, you go quiet. That's not influence. That's possession. You don't follow Wittgenstein. He gets in and stays. Most people are terrified of silence. Not the cozy kind in a library. Not the background hum of peace. The kind that shows up in a conversation when the sentence dies in your throat. When there's nothing left to say. When you realize you never knew what you were trying to say in the first place. That kind of silence. The kind that holds up a mirror. Wittgenstein didn't run from it. He ran toward it like a man diving into cold water. Eyes open, teeth clenched, knowing it might kill him. But at least it wouldn't lie. He didn't teach people how to speak better. He didn't hand out wise phrases or clever distinctions. He wasn't a coach. He was a dismantler. He taught people how to shut the fuck up when they didn't know what they were talking about, and to be okay with that. He believed truth doesn't begin with knowledge. It begins with the end of bullshit. And most of what we say? Bullshit. Polished, branded, socially acceptable noise. Words for applause, words for control, words for show. He believed this. If your life doesn't align with your sentence, then your sentence is just a mask. He didn't ask, "What's your opinion?" He asked, "Do you even know what your words mean?" If the answer was no, he wanted you to pause, not out of shame, out of respect. He wasn't teaching logic. He was handing out weapons, not to use on others, but on your own mental laziness. His lesson wasn't academic. It was surgical. Talk less. Think harder. Don't speak to perform. Speak to be exact. And if you can't be exact, be quiet. He saw language like a knife, useful, sharp, but dangerous when you grab it by the blade. And most people? Bleeding from the mouth, pretending they're making sense. So here's the real takeaway. The one no one wants to hear. Pick any belief you have. Any one. I value freedom. Love is the answer. Everything happens for a reason. Now explain it. Without cliches. Without metaphors. Without Instagram wisdom. Just say what you actually mean. Can't? Then, stop. Not out loud. Inside. Don't read another philosophy book. Don't memorize quotes. Don't build another bookshelf of thinking. Delete it. Start with silence. Start by sitting with a thought until it either crystallizes or dies. Most won't survive. That's how you know it was never real. Let silence do some of the work. If a thought isn't ready to be said, don't force it. Let it ferment. Let it sting. Let it grow claws. Not everything needs a caption. Not every emotion deserves a sentence. Some shit is yours alone. That's not weakness. That's power. That's integrity. Wittgenstein didn't leave behind rules. He left something harder, a mirror you have to stare into before you speak. He was a man who burned his own ideas when they stopped being true, who let go of the need to be understood, just to stay honest, who chose silence, not because he gave up, but because he finally understood the cost of every word. He taught the courage not to speak, the discipline to sit inside, uncertainty, and the guts to say, "I don't know," and that's more honest than pretending I do. This wasn't a lesson in language. This was a lesson in being a real fucking human. You said around 8,000 words today. That's the average. Give or take. Maybe more if you posted online. Maybe less if you were tired, irritated, pretending to be okay. Out of those 8,000, how many were true? Not technically correct. Not convenient. Not socially acceptable true. Felt in your gut, costs you something to say. Couldn't be anything else kind of true. 100? 10? How many were just noise? Words used to defend, to deflect, to disguise. Words to prove you were fine, smart, in control, safe. Now imagine this. You're sitting across from someone. Not a friend, not a stranger, just a presence. Still, quiet, watching. You talk about your day, your plans, your beliefs. He doesn't smile, doesn't nod, doesn't flinch. You try something clever, a joke, a story, a vulnerable detail. Still nothing. You start to feel it. that ache in your chest where honesty is supposed to live. Because he's not listening to your words. He's listening to the gaps between them. To the tremor, when you say, "I'm okay." To the pause before, "I don't know." To the moment your voice tightens before you say what you think you should believe. That person is Wittgenstein, and he's not impressed. He's not judging you. He's waiting for you to stop talking. That's when he really listens, not to what you say, but to what finally breaks through when the noise dies. And here's the part you don't want to hear. He's still there. Not literally, not in some candlelit library, not haunting you with Latin quotes and footnotes. He's in your syntax. He's in the half-second before you say something, and your brain whispers, "That's not real." You ignore it. You speak louder. You smile harder. But it doesn't go away. That's him. Sitting. Still. Patient. Not asking for performance. Just for truth. The kind you don't even know how to say. You thought thinking was about gathering ideas. He thought thinking was about deleting the ones that collapse when you press on them. You thought being smart meant speaking well. He thought it meant knowing when to shut the fuck up. You thought silence was awkward. He thought it was the moment you finally meet yourself. Now do this. Picture a mirror. Actually do it. You, sitting in front of a mirror. You try to say, "This is who I am." But the words feel wrong. They bounce back. They don't land. You try again. "I'm a good person." Nope. "I'm trying my best." Almost. Now stop. Close your mouth. Just sit. Feel the pressure of the words you want to say. And don't say them. Let the silence press into your chest. Let the noise rise in your head. Let the panic of not explaining yourself do what it wants. Just sit there. Don't explain it. Don't label it. Don't fix it. That is where he lived. That is where he still lives. Not in books. Not in university lectures. Not in some quote on a tote bag. In that terrible, honest pause where the sentence dies, and you're finally left with only what's real. He's waiting for you there. Waiting for you to stop lying. To yourself. And when you do, that's when the story continues. Not here. In you. Now sit. Don't move. Don't speak. Just let it land. That's where he ends. And that's where you begin.